Chapter 2. The crystalline clear water of the ribbon brimmed over the edge of the drop, in a smooth, gentle arc, falling in a soughing and frothing cascade among boulders as black as onyx. It broke up on them and vanished in a white foam, from where it split into a wide pool, which was so transparent that every pebble and every green strand of waterweed swaying in the current could be seen in the variegated mosaic of the riverbed. Both banks were overgrown with carpets of knot grass, through which dippers bustled, proudly flashing the white ruffles on their throats. Above the knot grass, bushes shimmered green, brown, and ochre against spruce trees which looked as though they had been sprinkled with silver. "Indeed," Dandelion sighed. "It's beautiful here." A large, dark bull trout attempted to jump the lip of the waterfall. For a moment it hung in the air, flexing its fins and flicking its tail, and then fell heavily into the seething foam. The darkening sky to the south was split by a forked ribbon of lightning, and the dull echo of distant thunder rumbled over the wall of trees. The Witcher's bay mare danced, jerked her head, and bared her teeth, trying to spit out the bit. Geralt tugged the reins hard, and the mare skittered backwards, dancing hooves clattering on the stones. "Whoa! Whoa! Do you see her, Dandelion? Damned ballerina! I'm getting rid of this bloody beast the first chance I get. Strike me down if I don't swap her for a donkey." "See that happening any time soon?" said the poet, scratching the itching mosquito bites on the nape of his neck. "This valley's savage landscape indeed offers unparalleled aesthetic impressions, but for a change I'd be happy to gaze on a less aesthetic tavern. I spent almost a week admiring nothing but romantic nature, breathtaking panoramas, and distant horizons. I miss the indoors, particularly the kind where they serve warm victuals and cold beer." "You'll have to carry on missing them a bit longer," said the Witcher, turning around in the saddle. "That I miss civilization a little too may alleviate your suffering. As you know, I was stuck in Brokilon for exactly 36 days, and nights too, when romantic nature was freezing my arse, crawling across my back, and sprinkling dew on my nose. Whoa! Pox on you! Will you stop sulking, you bloody nag?" "It's the horseflies biting her. The bugs are getting vicious and bloodthirsty because a storm's approaching. The thunder and lightning's getting more frequent to the south." "So I see," the Witcher said, looking at the sky and reining in his skittish horse. "And the wind's coming from a different direction too. It smells of the sea. The weather's changing without a doubt. Let's ride. Urge on that fat gelding of yours, Dandelion." "My steed is called Pegasus." "Of course, what else?" "Know what? Let's think up a name for my elven nag. Why not Roach?" mocked the troubadour. "Roach," agreed the Witcher. "Nice." "Geralt?" "Yes?" "Have you ever had a horse that wasn't called Roach?" "No," answered the Witcher after a moment's thought. "I haven't. Spur on that castrated Pegasus of yours, Dandelion. We've a long road ahead of us." "Indeed," grunted the poet. "Niflgaard? How many miles away do you reckon?" "Plenty." "Will we make it before winter?"
"We'll ride to Verden first. We have to discuss certain matters there."
"What matters? You'll neither discourage me nor get rid of me. I'm coming along. That is my last word."
"We shall see. As I said, we ride to Verden."
"Is it far? Do you know these lands?"
"Yes, I do. We're at Tries Falls, and in front of us there's a place called 7th Mile. Those are the Owl Hills beyond the river."
"And we're heading south, downriver. The ribbon joins the Yaruga near the stronghold at Bodrog."
"We're heading south, but along the other bank. The ribbon bends towards the west, and we'll go through the forest. I want to get to a place called Dreshot, or the Triangle. The borders of Verden, Brugger, and Brokilon meet there."
"And from there?"
"Along the Yaruga, to the mouth, and to Cintra."
"And then?"
"And then we'll see. If it's all possible, force that idle Pegasus of yours to go a little quicker."
A downpour caught them as they were crossing right in the middle of the river. First a strong wind got up, with hurricane-force gusts blowing their hair and mantles around, and lashing their faces with leaves and branches torn from the trees along the banks. They urged on their horses with shouts and kicks of their heels, stirring up the water as they headed for the bank. Then the wind suddenly dropped, and they saw a grey curtain of rain gliding towards them. The surface of the ribbon turned white and boiling, as though someone were hurling great handfuls of gravel at the river. Having reached the bank, drenched to the skin, they hurried to hide in the forest. The branches created a dense screen roof over their heads, but it was not a roof capable of protecting them from such a downpour. The rain lashed intensely and forced down the leaves, and was soon pouring on them almost as hard as it had in the open. They wrapped themselves up in their mantles, put up their hoods, and kept moving. It became dark among the trees, the only light coming from the increasingly frequent flashes of lightning. The thunder followed, with long, deafening crashes. Roach shied, stamped her hooves, and skittered around. Pegasus remained utterly calm. "Geralt!" Dandelion yelled, trying to outshout a peal of thunder which was crashing through the forest like a gigantic wagon. "We have to stop! Let's shelter somewhere!" "Where?" he shouted back. "Ride on!" And they rode on. After some time, the rain visibly eased off. The strong wind once again soughed in the branches, and the crashes of thunder stopped boring into their ears. They rode out onto a track among a dense alder grove, then into a clearing. A towering beech tree stood in the middle. Beneath its boughs, on a thick, wide carpet of brown leaves and beech nuts, stood a wagon harnessed to a pair of mules. A wagoner sat on the coachman's seat, pointing a crossbow at them. Geralt swore. His curse was drowned out by a clap of thunder. "Put the bow down, Calder," said a short man in a straw hat, turning from the trunk of a beech tree, hopping on one leg and fastening his trousers. "They're not the ones we're waiting for, but they are customers. Don't frighten away customers. We don't have much time, but there's always time to trade." "What the bloody hell?" muttered Dandelion behind Geralt's back. "Over here, Master Elves," the man in the hat called over. "Don't you worry, no harm will come your way. Nessa tier, fashy, Kive Mill. We're mates, right? Want to trade? Come on over here, under this tree, out of the rain." Geralt wasn't surprised by the wagoner's mistake. Both he and Dandelion were wrapped in grey elven mantles. He was also wearing a jerkin decorated with the kind of leafy patterns elves favoured, given to him by the dryads, was riding a horse with typical elven trappings and a decorated bridle. His face was partially hidden by his hood. As far as the foppish Dandelion was concerned, he was regularly mistaken for an elf or half-elf, particularly since he had begun wearing his hair shoulder-length and taken up the habit of occasionally curling it with tongs. "Careful," Geralt muttered, dismounting. "You're an elf, so don't open your trap if you don't have to." "Why?" "Because they're hawkers." Dandelion hissed softly. He knew what that meant. Money made the world go round, and supply was driven by demand. The Scoia'tael, roaming the forests, gathered saleable booty that was useless to them, while suffering from a shortage of equipment and weapons themselves. That was how forest trading began, and how a class of humans who earned their living from this kind of trade sprang up. The wagons of profiteers who traded with the squirrels began appearing clandestinely on forest tracks, paths, glades, and clearings. The elves called them havkiaren, an untranslatable word, but one which was associated with rapacious greed. Among humans, the term hawker became widespread, and the connotations were even more hideous than usual, because the traders themselves were so awful. Cruel and ruthless, they stopped at nothing, not even killing. A hawker caught by the army could not count on mercy, hence he was not in the habit of showing it himself. If they came across anyone who might turn them in, hawkers would reach for a crossbow or a knife without a second thought. So they were out of luck. It was fortunate the hawkers had taken them for elves. Geralt pulled his hood down over his eyes and began to wonder what would happen if the havkiaren saw through the masquerade. "What foul weather," said the trader, rubbing his hands. "It's pouring like the sky was leaking. Awful, Tevilea. But what to do? There's no bad weather for doing business. There's only bad goods and bad money in it. You know what I'm saying?" Geralt nodded. Dandelion grunted something from under his hood. Luckily for them, the elves' contemptuous dislike of conversing with humans was generally known and came as no surprise. The wagoner did not put the crossbow down, however, which was not a good sign. "Who are you with? Who's commando?" the hawker asked, unconcerned, as any serious trader would be, by the reticence of his customers. Coinach Dareos, or Angus Bricrees, or maybe Reardons. I heard Reardon put some royal bailiffs to the sword. They were travelling home after they'd done their duty, collecting a levy, and they had it in coinage, not grain. I don't take wood tar nor grain in payment, nor blood-stained clothing, and if we're talking furs, only mink, sable, or ermine. But what I like most is common coinage, precious stones and trinkets. If you have them, we can trade. I only have first-class goods, Evelyn. Vara en ard, skeda elaya. You know what I mean. I've got everything. Take a look.
The trader went over to the wagon and pulled back the edge of the wet tarpaulin. They saw swords, bows, bunches of arrows, and saddles. The hawker rooted around among them and took out an arrow. The arrowhead was serrated and sawn through.
You won't find any other traders selling this, he said boastfully. They'd shit themselves if they were to touch 'em. You'd be torn apart by horses if you were caught with arrows like that. But I know what you squirrels like. Customers come first, and you've got to take a risk when you barter, as long as there's a profit from it. I've got barbed arrowheads at 9 orens a dozen. Naive the ain to Videna, Elea. Got it, she? I swear I'm not fleecing you. I don't make much myself. I swear on my little children's heads. And if you take 3 dozen straight away, I'll knock a bit off the price. It's a bargain, I swear. A sheer bargain. Hey, she, hands off my wagon.
Dandelion nervously withdrew his hand from the tarpaulin and pulled his hood further down over his face. Once again, Geralt quietly cursed the bard's irrepressible curiosity.
Mir me vara,
mumbled Dandelion, raising his hand in a gesture of apology.
Squares me. No harm done, said the hawker, grinning, but no looking in there, because there's other goods in the wagon too. Not for sale, those, not for she. A special order. But that's enough rabbiting. Show us the colour of your money.
Here we go, thought Geralt, looking at the waggoner's knocked crossbow. He had reason to believe the quarrel's tip was barbed, too, just like the arrows he'd been so proudly shown moments before, and would, after entering the belly, exit through the back in 3 or sometimes 4 places, turning the victim's internal organs into a very messy goulash.
Nays Ted,
he said, trying to speak in a sing-song way.
Tier de Mirean vara vean vort. We'll trade when we return from the commando, Elea. Understood, Doina? Understood, the hawk said, spitting. Understood that you're skid. You'd like the goods, you just don't have the readies. Be off with you, and don't come back, because I'm meeting important parties here. It'll be safer if they don't clap eyes on you. Go to—
He broke off, hearing the snorting of a horse.
Damn it, he snarled. It's too late, I hear. Hoods down, Els. Don't move and button your lips. Calder, you ass. Put that crossbow down and fast.
The heavy rain, thunder, and the carpet of leaves had dampened the thudding of hooves, which meant the riders had been able to ride up undetected and surround the beech tree in an instant. They weren't scoia'tael. Squirrels didn't wear armour, and the metal helmets, spaulders, and hauberks of the 8 horsemen surrounding the tree were glistening in the rain. One of the horsemen approached at a walk and towered over the hawker like a mountain. He was of impressive height and was mounted on a powerful war-horse. A wolfskin was draped over his armoured shoulders, and his face was obscured by a helmet with a broad protruding nose-guard reaching down to his lower lip. The stranger was holding a menacing-looking warhammer.
"Rio,"
he called huskily.
"Foil Tiana,"
replied the trader in a slightly quavering voice. The horseman came even closer and leant forward. Water poured down from his steel nose-guard straight onto his vambrace and the balefully glistening point of the hammer.
"Foil Tiana,"
the hawker repeated, bowing low. He removed his hat, and the rain immediately plastered his thinning hair to his head.
"Foil Tiana, I'm your man. I know the password and the countersign. I've been with Foil Tiana, your lordship. Here I am, as arranged."
"And those men, who are they?"
"My escort," the hawker said, bowing even lower. "You know, elves."
"The prisoner?"
"On the wagon, in a coffin."
"In a coffin!" The thunder partially drowned the furious roar of the horseman.
"You won't get away with this. Viscount Rido gave clear instructions that the prisoner was to be handed over alive." "He's alive, he's alive," the trader gibbered hurriedly. "As per orders. Shoved into a coffin, but alive. The coffin wasn't my idea, your lordship. It was Foil Tiana's."
The horseman rapped the hammer against his stirrup as a sign. 3 other horsemen dismounted and pulled the tarpaulin off the wagon. When they had thrown various saddles, blankets, and bunches of harnesses onto the ground, Geralt actually saw a coffin made of fresh pine, lit by a flash of lightning.
He didn't look too closely, however. He felt a tingling in the tips of his fingers. He knew what was about to happen.
"What's all this, your lordship?"
the hawker said, looking at the goods lying on the wet leaves.
"You're chucking all my gear out of the wagon."
"I'll buy it all, along with the horse and cart."
"Ah!"
A repulsive grin crept over the trader's bristly face.
"Now you're talking. That'll be, let me think, 500, if you'll excuse me, your nobleness, if we're talking Temerian currency. If it's your florins, then it'll be 45.
"That's cheap," snorted the horseman, smiling eerily behind his nose guard. "Come closer." "Watch out, Dandelion," hissed the Witcher, imperceptibly unfastening the buckle of his mantle. It thundered once more. The hawker approached the horseman, naively counting on the deal of his life, and, in a way, it was the deal of his life. Not the best, perhaps, but certainly the last. The horseman stood in his stirrups and drove the point of the hammer down with great force onto the hawker's bald crown. The trader dropped without a sound, shuddered, flapped his arms, and scraped the wet carpet of leaves with his heels. One of the men rummaging around on the wagon threw a leather strap around the wagoner's neck and pulled it tight. The other leapt forward and stabbed him with a dagger. One of the horsemen raised his crossbow quickly to his shoulder and took aim at Dandelion. But Geralt already had a sword, one of those thrown from the wagon, in his hand. Seizing the weapon halfway down the blade, he flung it like a javelin and hit the crossbowman, who fell off the horse with an expression of utter astonishment on his face. "Run, Dandelion!" Dandelion caught up with Pegasus and leapt for the saddle with a desperate bound. The jump was a tad too desperate, however, and the poet was a tad too inexperienced. He didn't hang on to the pommel and tumbled to the ground on the other side of the horse. And that saved his life, as the blade of the attacking horseman's sword cut through the air above Pegasus's ears with a hiss. The gelding shied, jerked, and collided with the attacker's horse. "They aren't elves!" yelled the horseman in the helmet with the nose guard, drawing his sword. "Take them alive! Alive!" One of the men who had jumped down from the wagon hesitated on hearing the order. Geralt, however, had already drawn his own sword and didn't hesitate for a second. The fervour of the other two men was somewhat cooled by the fountain of blood which spurted over them. He took advantage of the situation and cut one of them down, but the horsemen were already charging at him. He ducked under their swords, parried their blows, dodged aside, and suddenly felt a piercing pain in his right knee. He could feel himself keeling over. He wasn't hurt. The injured leg, which had been treated in Brokilon, had simply crumpled under him without warning. The foot soldier aiming for him with the butt of a battle-axe suddenly groaned and lurched forward, as though someone had shoved him hard in the back. Before he fell, the Witcher saw an arrow with long fletchings sticking out of his assailant's side, driven in to halfway up the shaft. Dandelion yelled. A thunderclap drowned out his cry. Geralt, who was hanging on to one of the cartwheels, saw a fair-haired girl with a drawn bow dashing out of an alder grove. The horsemen saw her too. They couldn't fail to see her, because at that moment one of them tumbled backwards over his horse's croup, his throat transformed into a scarlet pulp by an arrow. The remaining three, including the leader in the helmet with the nose guard, assessed the danger immediately and galloped towards the archer, hiding behind their horses' necks. They thought the horses' necks represented sufficient protection against the arrows. They were mistaken. Maria Baring, also known as Milva, drew her bow. She took aim calmly, the bowstring pressed against her cheek. The first of her attackers screamed and slid off his horse. One foot caught in the stirrup, and he was trampled beneath the horse's iron-shod hooves. Another arrow hurled the second from his saddle. The third man, the leader, who was already close, stood in the saddle and raised his sword to strike. Milva did not even flinch. Fearlessly, looking straight at her attacker, she bent her bow and shot an arrow right into his face from a distance of 5 paces, striking just to the side of the steel noseguard and jumping aside as she shot. The arrow passed right through his skull, knocking off his helmet. The horse did not slow its gallop. The horseman, now lacking a helmet and a considerable part of his skull, remained in the saddle for a few seconds, then slowly tipped over and crashed into a puddle. The horse neighed and ran on. Geralt struggled to his feet and massaged his leg, which, though painful, for a wonder seemed to be functioning normally. He could stand on it without difficulty and walk. Next to him, Dandelion hauled himself up, throwing off the corpse with a mutilated throat which was weighing down on him. The poet's face was the colour of quicklime. Milva came closer, pulling an arrow from a dead man as she approached.
"Thank you," the Witcher said. "Dandelion, say thank you. This is Maria Baring, or Milva. It's thanks to her we're alive."
Milva yanked an arrow from another of the dead bodies and examined the bloody arrowhead. Dandelion mumbled incoherently, bent over in a courtly but somewhat quavering bow, then dropped to his knees and vomited. "Who's that?" the archer asked, wiping the arrowhead on some wet leaves and replacing it in her quiver. "A comrade of yours, Witcher?"
"Yes, his name's Dandelion. He's a poet."
"A poet?"
Milva watched the troubadour, racked by attacks of dry retching, and then looked up.
"That I can understand. But I don't quite understand why he's puking here instead of writing rhymes in a quiet spot somewhere. I suppose that's none of my business."
"It is yours, in a sense. You saved his skin, and mine too."
Milva wiped her rain-splashed face with the imprint of the bowstring still visible on it. Although she had shot several arrows, there was only one imprint, the bowstring pressed against the same place each time. "I was already in the alder grove when you started talking to the hawker," she said. "I didn't want the scoundrel to see me, for there was no need. And then those others arrived and the slaughter began. You messed a few of them up very nicely. You know how to swing a sword, I'll give you that. Even if you are a cripple. You should have stayed in Brokilon till your peg healed, instead of making it worse. You might limp for the rest of your life, you realise that, don't you?"
"I'll survive."
"I reckon you will too. I followed you to warn you, and to make you turn back. Your quest won't come to anything. There's a war raging in the south. The Niflgaardian army are marching on Brugge from Drishot."
"How do you know?"
"Just look at them," the girl said, making a sweeping gesture and pointing at the bodies and the horses. "I mean the Niflgaardians. Can't you see the suns on their helmets, the embroidery on their saddlecloths? Pack up your things and we'll take to our heels. More of them may arrive any moment. These were mounted scouts."
"I don't think they were just scouts," he said, shaking his head. "They were after something."
"What might that be, just out of interest?"
"That," he said,
pointing at the pinewood coffin lying in the wagon, now darkened from the rain. It wasn't raining as hard as it had been during the short battle, and it had stopped thundering. The storm was moving north. The Witcher picked up his sword from among the leaves and jumped onto the wagon, quietly cursing because his knee still hurt.
"Help me get it open."
"What do you want with a stiff?" Milva broke off, seeing the holes bored into the lid. "Bloody hell! Was the hawker looking a live person around in here?"
"It's some kind of prisoner," Geralt said, levering the lid open. "The trader was waiting for these Nilfgaardians to hand him over to them. They exchanged passwords and countersigns."
The lid tore off with the sound of splitting wood, revealing a man with a gag over his mouth, his arms and legs fastened to the sides of the coffin by leather straps. The Witcher leant over. He took a good look, and again, this time more intently, and swore.
"Well, I never," he drawled. "What a surprise. Who would have thought it?"
"Do you know him, Witcher?"
"By sight."
He smiled hideously.
"Put the knife away, Milva. Don't cut his bonds. It seems this is an internal Nilfgaardian matter. We shouldn't get involved. Let's leave him as he is."
"Am I hearing right?" Dandelion asked, joining in from behind. He was still pale, but curiosity had overcome his other emotions. "Are you planning to leave him tied up in the forest? I'm guessing you've recognized someone you have a bone to pick with, but he's a prisoner, by the gods. He was the prisoner of the men who jumped us and almost killed us, and the enemy of our enemy." He broke off, seeing the Witcher removing a knife from his boot-top. Milva coughed quietly. The captive's dark blue eyes, previously screwed up against the rain, widened. Geralt leant over and cut the strap fastened around the prisoner's left arm.
"Look, Dandelion,"
he said, seizing the captive's wrist and raising his now free arm.
"Do you see the scar on his hand? Ciri did that, on the Isle of Thanedd a month ago. He's a Nilfgaardian. He came to Thanedd specifically to abduct Ciri, and she wounded him defending herself from being captured."
"But it all came to nothing anyway," muttered Milva. "I sense something doesn't add up here. If he kidnapped your Ciri for Nilfgaard, how did he end up in this coffin? Why was that hawker handing him over to the Nilfgaardians? Take that gag off him, Witcher. Perhaps he'll tell us something."
"I have no desire to listen to him," he said flatly. My hand is itching to stab him through the heart, with him lying there looking at me. It's all I can do to restrain myself, and if he opens his mouth, I know I won't be able to hold back. I haven't told you everything.
Don't hold back, then.
Milva shrugged her shoulders.
Stick him if he's such a villain, but do it quickly, because time's getting on. As I said, the Nilfgaardians will be here soon. I'm going to get my horse.
Geralt straightened up and released the captive's hand. The man immediately loosened the gag and spat it out of his mouth, but he said nothing. The Witcher threw his knife onto the man's chest. I don't know what sins you committed for them to trap you in this chest, Nilfgaardian, he said, and I don't care. I'll leave you this blade. Free yourself. Wait here for your own people or escape into the forest. It's up to you. The captive said nothing. Tied up and lying in that wooden crate, he looked even more miserable and defenceless than he had on Thanet, and Geralt had seen him there on his knees, wounded and trembling with fear in a pool of blood. He also looked considerably younger now. The Witcher wouldn't have put him at more than 25. I spared your life on the island, he said, and I'm doing it again, but it's the last time. The next time we meet, I'll kill you like a dog. Remember that. If you persuade your comrades to pursue us, take the coffin with you. It'll come in useful. Let's go, Dandelion.
Make haste,
Milva shouted, turning away at full gallop from the westward track.
But not that way. Into the trees, by thunder, into the trees.
What's going on?
A large group of riders are heading towards us from the ribbon. It's Nilfgaard. What are you staring at? To horse, before they're upon us.
The battle for the village had been going on for an hour and wasn't showing any signs of finishing soon. The infantry, holding out behind stone walls, fences, and upturned wagons, had repulsed 3 attacks by the cavalry, who came charging at them from the causeway. The width of the causeway did not permit the horsemen to gain enough momentum for a frontal attack, but allowed the foot soldiers to concentrate their defence. As a result, waves of cavalry repeatedly foundered on the barricades, behind which the desperate but fierce soldiers were shooting a hail of quarrels and arrows into the mounted throng. The cavalry seethed and teemed under this assault, and then the defenders rushed out at them in a rapid counterattack, fighting furiously with battle-axes, guisarmes, and studded flails. The cavalry retreated to the ponds, leaving human and equine corpses behind, while the infantry concealed themselves among the barricades and hurled filthy insults at the enemy. After a while, the cavalry formed up and attacked once again. And again. "Who do you think's fighting whom?" Dandelion asked once more, but indistinctly, as he was trying to soften and chew a piece of hardtack he had scrounged from Milva. They were sitting on the very edge of the cliff, well hidden among juniper shrubs. They were able to watch the battle without being afraid anyone would notice them. Actually, they could do nothing but watch. They had no choice. A battle was raging in front of them, and a forest fire was raging behind them. "It's easy to identify them," Geralt said, reluctantly responding to Dandelion's question. "They're Nilfgaardian horsemen."
"And the infantry?"
"The infantry aren't Nilfgaardian."
"The horsemen are regular cavalrymen from Verden," said Milva,
until then sombre and strangely taciturn.
"They have the Verdanian checkerboard emblem sewn into their tunics, and the ones in the village are the Brugian regular infantry. You can tell by their banners."
Indeed, encouraged by another small victory, the infantrymen raised their green standard, with a white cross moline, above the entrenchment. Geralt had been watching intently, but hadn't noticed the standard before. It must have gone missing at the start of the battle.
"Are we staying here for much longer?"
Dandelion asked. "Oh dear," muttered Milva. "Here he goes.
Take a look around. Whichever way you turn, it looks pretty shitty, doesn't it?"
Dandelion didn't have to look or turn around. The entire horizon was striped with columns of smoke. It was thickest to the north and the west, where the armies had set fire to the forests. Smoke was also rising into the sky in many places to the south, where they had been heading when the battle had barred their way. And during the hour they had spent on the hill, smoke had also started rising to the east.
"However,"
the archer began a moment later, looking at Geralt,
"I'd really like to know what you intend doing now, Witcher. Behind us we've got Nilfgaard and a burning forest, and you can see for yourself what's in front of us. So what are your plans?"
"My plans haven't changed. I'll wait for this scrap to finish and then I'll head south, towards the Eruga."
"I think you've lost your mind," Milva scowled. "Can't you see what's happening? It's as clear as the nose on your face that it's not some leaderless band of mercenaries, but something called war. Niflgaard and Verden are on the march. They're sure to have crossed the Yaruga in the south, and probably the whole of Brugge and possibly Sodden are in flames. I have to get to the Yaruga. Excellent. And what then? I'll find a boat. I'll sail downstream and try to make it to the delta. Then a ship. Hell, some ships must still sail from there. To Niflgaard? She snorted. So the plans haven't changed? You don't have to go with me. No, I don't. And praise the gods for that, because I don't have a death wish. I'm not afraid, but mind you, getting yourself killed is no claim to fame. I know, he replied calmly. I know from experience. I wouldn't be heading that way if I didn't have to. But I have to, so I'm going. Nothing's going to stop me. Ah, she said, looking him up and down. Listen to this hero. His voice like someone scraping a sword across a shield. If Imperator Emir could hear you, I'm sure he'd be shitting his britches in terror. To my side, guards, to my side, my imperial regiments. Oh, woe is me. The Witcher's heading for Niflgaard in a rowing boat. Soon he'll be here to take my crown and life from me. I'm doomed. Give over, Milver. I won't. It's time someone finally told you the truth to your face. Fuck me with a mangy rabbit if I've ever seen a stupider clod. You're going to snatch your maid from Emir? The same maid Emir's got lined up as his imperatress? The girl he snatched from Thanev? Emir's got long hands. They don't let go of what they seize. The king stand no chance against him, but still you fancy yours? He didn't answer. You're heading for Niflgaard, Milver repeated, shaking her head in mock sympathy. To fight the Imperator and rescue his fiancée. But have you thought about what might happen? When you get there, when you find Ciri in her imperial apartments, all dressed in gold and silk, what will you say to her? Follow me, my darling. What do you want with an imperial throne? We'll live together in a shack and eat bark during the lean season. Look at yourself, you lame scruff. You even got your coat and boots from the Dryads, stripped from some elf who died of his wounds in Brokilon. And you know what will happen when your maid sees you? She'll spit in your eye and scorn you. She'll order the Imperial Guard to throw you out on your ear and set the dogs on you. Milver was speaking louder and louder, and she was almost shouting by the end of her tirade, not only from anger, but also to be heard over the intensifying noise of battle. Down below, scores, or even hundreds of throats were roaring. Another attack descended on the Bruggian infantry, but this time from two sides simultaneously. Verdanians, dressed in greyish-blue tunics adorned with a checkered pattern, galloped along the causeway, while a powerful cavalry force in black cloaks dashed out from behind the ponds, striking the defenders' flank. Niflgaard, said Milver tersely. This time, the Bruggian infantry had no chance. The cavalry forced their way through the barricades and ripped the defenders apart with their swords. The standard with the cross fell. Some of the infantrymen laid down their arms and surrendered. Others tried to escape towards the trees, but as they ran, a third unit emerged from the trees and attacked, a mixed band of light cavalry. The Scoia Tile, Milver said, getting to her feet. Now do you understand what's going on, Witcher? Do you get it? Niflgaard, Verden, and the squirrels all at once. War. Like it was in Aedirn a month ago. It's a raid, Geralt said, shaking his head. A plundering raid. Only horsemen. No infantry. The infantry are capturing forts and their garrisons. Where do you think those plumes of smoke are coming from? Smokehouses? The bestial, dreadful screams of people fleeing only to be caught and slaughtered by the squirrels drifted up from the village. Smoke and flames belched from the roofs of the cottages. A strong wind was swiftly spreading the fire from one thatched roof to another. Look at that village going up in smoke, muttered Milver. And they'd only just finished rebuilding it after the last war. They sweated for 2 years to put up the foundations, and it'll burn down in a few seconds. That's a lesson to be learned. What lesson would that be? Asked Geralt brusquely. She didn't answer. The smoke from the burning village rose up to the top of the cliff, stung their eyes and made them water. They could hear the screams from the inferno. Dandelion suddenly went as white as a sheet. The captives were driven into a huddle, surrounded by a ring of soldiers. On the order of a knight in a black-plumed helmet, the horsemen began to slash and stab the unarmed villagers. They were trampled by horses as they fell. The ring tightened. The screams, which reached the cliff top, no longer resembled sounds made by humans. And you want to travel south? Asked the poet, looking meaningfully at the Witcher. Through these fires? Where these butchers come from?
Seems to me, Geralt replied reluctantly, that we don't have a choice.
Yes, we do, Milva said. I can lead you through the forests to the Owl Hills and back to Therese and Brokilon.
Through those burning forests, through more skirmishes like this.
It's safer than the road south. It's no more than 14 miles to Therese, and I know which paths to take. The Witcher looked down at the village, perishing in the flames. The Nilfgaardians had dealt with the captives, and the cavalry had formed up in marching order. The motley band of Scoia'tael set off along the highway leading east.
I'm not going back, he retorted. But you can escort Dandelion to Brokilon.
No,
the poet protested, although he still hadn't regained his normal colour.
I'm going with you.
Milva shrugged, picked up her quiver and bow, took a step towards the horses, and then suddenly turned around.
Devil take it, she snapped. I've been saving elves from death for too long. I can't just let someone go to his death. I'll lead you to the Yaruga, you crazy fools, but by the eastern route, not the southern one.
The forests are burning there, too.
I'll lead you through the fire, I'm used to it.
You don't have to, Milva.
Too right I don't. Now to horse, and get a bloody move on. They didn't get far. The horses had difficulty moving through the undergrowth and along the overgrown tracks, and they didn't dare use roads. The hoofbeats and clanking could be heard everywhere, betraying the presence of armed forces. Dusk surprised them among brush-covered ravines, so they stopped for the night. It wasn't raining, and the sky was bright from the glow of fires. They found a fairly dry place, wrapped themselves in their mantles and blankets, and sat down. Milva went off to search the surrounding area. As soon as she moved away, Dandelion gave vent to the long-suppressed curiosity that the Brokilonian archer had aroused in him. "That's a comely girl, if ever there was one," he murmured. "You're lucky when it comes to the female of the species, Geralt. She's tall and curvaceous, and walks as though she were dancing. A little too slim in the hips for my taste, and a little too sturdy in the shoulders, but she's very womanly. And those two little apples in the front, ho, almost bursting out of her blouse. Shut it, Dandelion." "I happened to bump against her by accident on the road," the poet dreamed on. "A thigh, I tell you, like marble. Methinks you weren't bored during that month in Brokilon." Milva, who had just returned from her patrol, heard his theatrical whispering and noticed their expressions. "Are you talking about me, poet? What are you staring at as soon as my back's turned? Has a bird shat on me?" "We're amazed by your archery skills," Dandelion grinned. "You wouldn't find much competition at an archery tournament." Yes, I've heard it all before, and the rest." "I've read," Dandelion said, winking tellingly at Geralt, "that the best archeresses can be found among the Zerrikanian steppe clans. I gather that some even cut off their left breast, so it won't interfere when they draw the bow. Their breast, they say, gets in the way of the bowstring." "Some poet must have dreamed that up," Milva snorted. "He sits down and writes twaddle like that, dipping his quill in a chamber pot, and foolish people believe it. Think I use my tits to shoot with, do you? You pull the bowstring back to your kisser, standing side on like this. Nothing snags on the bowstring. All that talk of cutting off a tit is hogwash, thought up by some layabout with nothing but women's bodies on the brain." "Thank you for your kind words about poets and poetry, and the archery lesson. Good weapon, a bow. You know what? I think the arts of war will develop in that direction. People are going to fight at a distance in the wars of the future. They'll invent a weapon with such a long range that the two sides will be able to kill each other while completely out of eyeshot." "Twaddle," Milva said bluntly. "A bow's a good thing, but war's all about man against man, a sword's length apart, the stouter one smashing the weaker one's head in. That's how it's always been, and that's how it'll always be. And once that finishes, all wars will finish. But for now, you've seen how wars are fought. You saw it in that village by the causeway, and that's enough idle talk. I'm going to have another look around. The horses are snorting as though a wolf was sniffing around." "Comely. Oh, yes." Dandelion followed her with his gaze. Going back to the village by the causeway and what she told you when we were sitting on the cliff, don't you think there's something in what she says?
About?
About Ciri, the poet stammered slightly. Our beautiful, sharp-shooting wench seems not to understand the relationship between you and Ciri, and thinks, it seems to me, that you intend to woo her away from the Nilfgaardian Imperator. That's the real motive behind your expedition to Nilfgaard.
So, in that regard, she's totally wrong. But what's she right about?
Take it easy. Keep your cool. Nonetheless, stare the truth in the face. You took Ciri under your wing and consider yourself her guardian. But she's no ordinary girl. She's a princess, Geralt. Without beating about the bush, she's in line for the throne, for the palace and the crown. Maybe not necessarily the Nilfgaardian crown. I don't know if Emir is the best husband for her.
Precisely. You don't know.
And do you? The Witcher wrapped himself up in a blanket.
You're heading quite naturally towards a conclusion, he said. But don't bother. I know what you're thinking. There's no point saving Ciri from a fate she's been doomed to since the day of her birth, because Ciri, who doesn't need saving at all, will be quite ready to order the Imperial Guard to throw us down the stairs. Let's forget about her, right?
Dandelion opened his mouth, but Geralt didn't let him speak.
After all, he continued in an even harsher voice, the girl wasn't abducted by a dragon or an evil wizard, nor did pirates seize her for the ransom money. She's not locked in a tower, a dungeon, or a cage. She's not been tortured or starved. Quite the opposite. She sleeps on damask, eats from silverware, wears silk and lace, is bedecked with jewellery, and is just waiting to be crowned. In short, she's happy. Meanwhile, some witcher, who by some unfortunate fate happened upon her, has taken it upon himself to disrupt, spoil, destroy and crush that happiness beneath the rotten old boots he pulled off some dead elf, right?
That's not what I was thinking, Dandelion muttered.
He wasn't talking to you,
Milva said, suddenly looming up from the darkness, and, after a moment's hesitation, sitting down beside the Witcher.
That was for me.
It was my words that upset him.
I spoke in anger, without thinking.
Forgive me, Geralt.
I know what it's like when a claw scratches an open wound.
Come on, don't fret. I won't do it any more.
Do you forgive me, or should I say sorry by kissing you?
Not waiting either for an answer or permission, she grabbed him powerfully by the neck and kissed him on the cheek. He squeezed her shoulder hard.
Slide nearer, he coughed. And you too, Dandelion. We'll be warmer together.
They said nothing for a long time. Clouds scudded across a sky bright with firelight, obscuring the twinkling stars.
I want to tell you something, Geralt said at last. But promise you won't laugh.
Out with it.
I had some strange dreams in Brokilon. At first, I thought they were ravings, something wrong with my head. You know, I got a good beating on Thanev. But I keep having the same dream. Always the same one.
Dandelion and Milva said nothing.
Ciri, he began a moment later, isn't sleeping in a palace beneath a brocade canopy. She's riding a horse through a dusty village. The villagers are pointing at her. They're calling her by a name I don't recognise. Dogs are barking. She's not alone. There are others with her. There's a crop-haired girl who's holding Ciri's hand, and Ciri's smiling at her. But I don't like that smile. I don't like her heavy makeup. But the thing I like least is that she leaves a trail of death.
So where is the girl? Milva mused, snuggling up to him like a cat. Not in Nilfgaard.
I don't know, he said with difficulty. But I've had the same dream several times. The problem is, I don't believe in dreams like that.
Well, you're a fool. I do.
I don't know it, he repeated, but I can feel it. There's fire ahead of her and death behind her. I have to make haste.
It began to rain at dawn, not like the previous day when the storm had been accompanied by a brief but strong downpour. The sky turned grey and took on a leaden patina. It began to spit with rain, a fine, even and drenching drizzle. They rode east. Milva led the way. When Geralt pointed out to her that the Yaruga was to the south, the archer growled and reminded him she was the guide and knew what she was doing. He said nothing after that. After all, the most important thing was that they were underway. The direction wasn't so important. They rode in silence, wet, chilled to the bone, and hunched over their saddles. They kept to footpaths, stole along forest tracks, cut across highways. They disappeared into the undergrowth at the sound of thudding hooves of cavalry tramping along the roads. They gave a wide berth to the uproar of battle. They rode past villages engulfed in flames, past smoking and glowing rubble, and past settlements and hamlets which had been razed to black squares of burnt earth and the acrid stench of rain-soaked charred embers. They startled flocks of crows feeding on corpses. They passed groups and columns of peasants bent beneath bundles, fleeing from war and conflagration, dazed, responding to questions with nothing but a fearful, uncomprehending and mute raising of their eyes, emptied by misfortune and horror. They rode east amidst fire and smoke, amidst drizzle and fog, and the tapestry of war unfolded in front of their eyes. So many sights. There was a black silhouette of a crane projecting among the ruins of a burnt-out village, with a naked corpse dangling from it, head downwards. Blood from the mutilated crotch and belly dripped down onto its chest and face to hang like icicles from its hair. The rune of Ard was visible on its back, carved with a knife. "Angivari," Milva said, throwing her wet hair off her neck. "The squirrels were here." "What does Angivari mean?" "Informer." There was a grey horse, saddled in a black caparison. It was walking unsteadily around the edge of the battlefield, wandering between piles of corpses and broken spears stuck into the ground, whinnying quietly and pitifully, dragging its entrails behind it, dangling from its mutilated belly. They couldn't finish it off, for on the battlefield, apart from the horse, there were also marauders robbing corpses. There was a spread-eagled girl lying near a burnt-out farmyard, naked, bloody, staring at the sky with glazed eyes. "They say war's a male thing," Milva growled, "but they have no mercy on women. They have to have their fun. Fucking heroes, damn them all." "You're right, but you won't change it." "I already have. I ran away from home. I didn't want to sweep the cottage and scrub the floors. I wasn't going to wait until they arrived and put the cottage to the torch, spread me out on the very same floor and—" She broke off and spurred her horse forward. And later there was a tar house. Here Dandelion puked up everything he'd eaten that day, some hardtack and half a stockfish. In the tar house some Nilfgaardians, or perhaps Scoia'tael, had dealt with a group of captives. It was impossible even to guess at the exact size of the group, because during the carnage they had not only used arrows, swords and lances, but also woodmen's tools they'd found there, axes, draw knives and cross-cut saws. There were other scenes of war, but Geralt, Dandelion and Milva didn't remember them. They had discarded them from their memories. They had become indifferent. Over the next 2 days, they didn't even cover 20 miles. It continued to rain. The earth, absorbent after the summer drought, sucked up water like a sponge, and the forest tracks were transformed into muddy slides. Fog and haze prevented them from spotting the smoke from fires, but the stench of burning buildings told them the armies were still close at hand and were still setting light to anything that would catch fire. They didn't see any fugitives. They were alone in the forest, or so they thought. Geralt was the first to hear the snorting of the horse following in their tracks. With a stony countenance, he turned roach back. Dandelion opened his mouth, but Milva gestured him to remain silent, and removed her bow from where it hung by her saddle. The rider, following them, emerged from the brush. He saw they were waiting for him, and reined back his horse, a chestnut colt. They stood in a silence broken only by the beating of the rain. "I forbade you from riding after us," the Witcher finally said. The Nilfgaardian, whom Dandelion had last seen lying in a coffin,
looked down at his horse's wet mane. The poet barely recognized him, as he was now dressed in a hauberk, leather tunic and cloak, no doubt stripped from one of the horsemen killed by the wagon. However, he remembered the young face, which hadn't grown much more stubble since the adventure under the beech tree. "I forbade it," the Witcher repeated. "You did," the young man finally agreed. He spoke without a Nilfgaardian accent. "But I must." Geralt dismounted, handing the reins to the poet, and drew his sword. "Get down," he said calmly. "You've equipped yourself with some hardware, I see. Good. There was no way I could kill you then while you were unarmed. Now it's different. Dismount." "I'm not fighting you. I don't want to." "So I imagine. Like all your fellow countrymen, you prefer another kind of fight, like in that tar house, which you must have ridden past following our trail. Dismount, I said." "I'm Kaya Maur Daithrin ap Kielach." "I didn't ask you to introduce yourself. I ordered you to dismount." "I will not. I don't want to fight you." "Milver?" The Witcher nodded at the archer. "Be so kind as to shoot his horse from under him." "No!" The Nilfgaardian raised an arm, before Milver had time to knock her arrow. "Please don't. I'm dismounting." "That's better. Now draw your sword, son." The young man folded his arms across his chest. "Kill me if you want. If you prefer, order the she-elf to shoot me. I'm not fighting you. I'm Kaya Maur Daithrin, son of Kielach. I want to join you." "I must have misheard. Say that again." "I want to join you. You're riding to search for the girl. I want to help you. I have to help you." "He's a madman." Geralt turned to Milver and Dandelion. "He's taken leave of his senses. We're dealing with a madman." "He'd suit the company," muttered Milver. "He'd suit it perfectly." "Think his proposition over, Geralt," Dandelion mocked. "After all, he's a Nilfgaardian nobleman. Perhaps with his help it'll be easier for us to get to—" "Keep your tongue in check," the Witcher interrupted the poet sharply. "As I said, draw your sword, Nilfgaardian." "I am not going to fight, and I am not a Nilfgaardian. I come from Vicovaro, and my name is—" "I'm not interested in your name. Draw your weapon." "No!" "Witcher!" Milver leant down from the saddle and spat on the ground. "Time's flying, and the rain's falling. The Nilfgaardian doesn't want to fight, and although you're pulling a stern face, you won't cut him to pieces in cold blood. Do we have to hang about here all fucking day? I'll stick an arrow in his chestnut's underbelly and let's be on our way. He won't catch up on foot." Cair, son of Kielach, was by his chestnut colt in one bound, jumped into the saddle, and galloped back the way he'd come, yelling at his steed to go faster. The Witcher watched him riding off for a moment, then mounted Roach in silence, without looking back. "I'm getting old," he mumbled some time later, after Roach had caught up with Milver's black. "I'm starting to develop scruples." "Aye, it can happen with old uns," said the archer, looking at him in sympathy. "A decoction of long work can help, but for now put a cushion on your saddle." "Scruples," Dandelion exclaimed gravely, "are not the same as piles, Milver. You're confusing the terms." "Who could understand your smart-ass chatter? You never stop jabbering. It's the only thing you know. Come on, let's ride." "Milver?" the Witcher asked a moment later, protecting his face from the rain, which stabbed against it as they galloped. "Would you have killed the horse under him?" "No," she confessed reluctantly. "The horse hadn't done anything. But that Nilfgaardian, why in hell is he stalking us? Why does he say he has to?" "Devil take me if I know." It was still raining when the forest suddenly came to an end, and they rode onto a highway winding between the hills from the south to the north, or the other way around, depending on your point of view. What they saw on the highway didn't surprise them. They had already seen similar sights. Overturned and gutted wagons, dead horses, scattered bundles, saddlebags and baskets, and ragged shapes which not long before had been people, frozen into strange poses. They rode closer without fear, because it was apparent that the slaughter had not taken place that day. They had come to recognize such things, or perhaps to sense them with a purely animalistic instinct, which the last days had awoken and sharpened in them.
They had also learned to search through battlefields, because occasionally, though not often, they had managed to find a little food or a sack of fodder among the scattered objects. They stopped by the last wagon of a devastated column. It had been pushed into the ditch and was resting on the hub of a shattered wheel. Beneath the wagon lay a stout woman with an unnaturally twisted neck. The collar of her tunic was covered with rain-washed streaks of coagulated blood from her torn ear, from which an earring had been ripped. The sign on the tarpaulin pulled over the wagon read, Vera Löwenhaupt and Sons. There was no sign of the sons. They weren't peasants, Milver said through pursed lips. They were traders. They came from the south, wending from Dillingen towards Brugge, and were caught here. It's not good, Witcher. I thought we could turn south at this point, but now I truly have no idea what to do. Dillingen and the whole of Brugge is sure to be in Nilfgaardian hands, so we won't make it to the Yaruga this way. We'll have to go east through Turlo. There are forests and wildernesses there. The army won't go that way. I'm not going any further east, Geralt protested. I have to get to the Yaruga. You'll get there, she replied, unexpectedly calm, but by a safer route. If we head south from here, you'll fall right into the Nilfgaardians' jaws. You won't gain anything. I'll gain time, he snapped. By heading east, I'm just wasting it. I told you, I can't afford to— Quiet! Dandelion said suddenly, steering his horse around. Be quiet for a moment. What is it? I can hear. Singing. The Witcher shook his head. Milver snorted. You're hearing things, poet. Quiet, shut up. I'm telling you. Someone's singing. Can't you hear it? Geralt lowered his hood. Milver also strained to listen, and a moment later glanced at the Witcher and nodded silently. The troubadour's musical ear hadn't let him down. What had seemed impossible turned out to be true. Here they were, standing in the middle of a forest, in the drizzle, on a road strewn with corpses, and they could hear singing. Someone was approaching from the south, singing jauntily and gaily. Milver tugged the reins of her black, ready to flee, but the Witcher gestured to her to wait. He was curious, because the singing they could hear wasn't the menacing, rhythmic, booming, massed singing of marching infantry, nor a swaggering cavalry song. The singing, which was becoming louder all the time, didn't arouse any anxiety. Quite the opposite. The rain drummed on the foliage. They began to make out the words of the song. It was a merry song which seemed strange, unnatural, and totally out of place in this landscape of death and war. Look how the wolf dances in the holt, teeth bared, tail waving, leaping like a colt. Oh, why does he prance like one bewitched? The frolicking beast simply hasn't been hitched. Oompa, 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 pa. Dandelion suddenly laughed, took his lute from under his wet mantle, and ignoring the hissing from the Witcher and Milver, strummed the strings and joined in at the top of his voice. Look how the wolf is dragging his paws, head drooping, tail hanging, clenching his jaws. Oh, why is the beast in such a sorry state? He's either proposed or he's married his mate. Ho-ho-ha! Came the roared response from many voices close by. Thunderous laughter burst out. Then someone whistled piercingly through their fingers, after which a strange but colourful company came walking around a bend in the highway, marching in single file, splashing mud with rhythmic steps of their heavy boots. Dwarves, Milver said under her breath. But they aren't Scoia'tael. They don't have plaited beards. There were 6 of them, dressed in short, hooded capes, shimmering with countless shades of grey and brown, the kind which were usually worn by dwarves in foul weather. Capes like that, as Geralt knew, had the quality of being totally waterproof, which was achieved by the impregnation of wood tar over many years, not to mention dust from the highway and the remains of greasy food. These practical garments passed from fathers to eldest sons. As a result, they were used exclusively by mature dwarves, and a dwarf attains maturity when his beard reaches his waist, which usually occurs at the age of 55. None of the approaching dwarves looked young, but none looked old either. They're leading some humans, muttered Milver, indicating to Geralt with a movement of her head, a small group emerging from the forest behind the company of dwarves, who must be fugitives, because they're laden down with goods and chattels. The dwarves aren't exactly travelling light themselves, Dandelion added. Indeed, each dwarf was heaving a load that many humans and horses would soon have collapsed under. In addition to the ordinary sacks and saddlebags, Geralt noticed iron-bound chests, a large copper cauldron, and something that looked like a small chest of drawers. One of them was even carrying a cartwheel on his back. The one walking at the front wasn't carrying anything. He had a small battle-axe in his belt. On his back was a longsword in a scabbard, wrapped in tabby catskins, and on his shoulder sat a green parrot with wet, ruffled feathers. The dwarf addressed them. "Greetings!" he roared, after coming to a halt in the middle of the road and putting his hands on his hips. "These days it's better to meet a wolf in the forest than a human, and if you do have such bad luck, you're more likely to be greeted with an arrow in the chest than a kind word. But whoever greets someone with a song or music must be a sound fellow, or a sound wench. My apologies to the good lady. Greetings. I'm Zoltan Chive." "I'm Geralt." The Witcher introduced himself after a moment's hesitation. "The singer is Dandelion, and this is Milva."
"Now,"
the parrot squawked. "Shut your beak!" Zoltan Chive growled at the bird. "Excuse me, this foreign bird is clever but vulgar. I paid 10 thalers for the freak. He's called Field Marshal Windbag, and while I'm at it, this is the rest of my party. Munro Broys, Jason Vada, Caleb Stratton, Figgis Maluzzo, and Percival Schuttenbach." Percival Schuttenbach wasn't a dwarf. From beneath his wet hood, instead of a matted beard, stuck out a long, pointed nose, unerringly identifying its owner as one of the old and noble race of gnomes. "And those," Zoltan Chive said, pointing at the small group of humans who had stopped and were huddled together, "are fugitives from Kurno. As you can see, they're women and children. There were more, but Niflgaard seized them and their fellows 3 days ago. Put some of them to the sword and scattered the others. We came across them in the forest, and now we're travelling together." "It's bold of you," the Witcher ventured, "to be marching along the highway singing as you go." "I don't reckon," the dwarf said, wiggling his beard, "that weeping as we go would do any better. We've been marching through the woods since Dillingen, quietly and out of sight, and after the army passed, we joined the highway to make up time." He broke off and looked around the battlefield. "We've grown accustomed to sights like this," he said, pointing at the corpses. "Beyond Dillingen and the Yaruga, there's nothing but dead bodies on the roads. Were you with this lot?" "No. Niflgaard put some traders to the sword." "Not Niflgaard," said the dwarf, shaking his head and looking at the dead with an indifferent expression. "Squire tile. The regular army don't bother pulling arrows out of corpses, and a good arrowhead costs 1/2 a crown." "He knows his prices," Milva muttered. "Where are you headed?" "South," Geralt answered immediately. "I advise you against it," Zoltan Chive said, and shook his head again. "It's sheer hell. Fire and slaughter there. Dillingen is taken for sure. The Nilfgaardians are crossing the Yaruga in greater and greater numbers. Any moment now they'll flood the whole valley on the right bank. As you see, they're also in front of us to the north. They're heading for the city of Brugge. So the only sensible direction to escape is east." Milva glanced knowingly at the Witcher, who refrained from comment. "And that's where we're headed, east," Zoltan Chive continued. "The only chance is to hide behind the front line and wait until the Temerian army finally start out from the river Aina in the east. Then we plan to march along forest tracks until we reach the hills, Turlo, then the old road to the river Chotlar in Sodden, which flows into the Aina. We can travel together if you wish, if it doesn't bother you that we make slow progress. You're mounted, and I realize our refugees slow the pace down." "It doesn't seem to bother you, though," Milva said, looking at him intently. "A dwarf, even fully laden, can march 30 miles a day, almost the same as a mounted human. I know the old road. Without those refugees, you'd reach the Chotlar in about 3 days." "They are women and children," Zoltan Chive said, sticking out his beard and his belly. "We won't leave them to their fate. Would you suggest we do anything else, eh?" "No," the Witcher said. "No, we wouldn't." "I'm pleased to hear it. That means my first impressions didn't deceive me. So, what's it to be? Do we march as one company?" Geralt looked at Milva, and the archer nodded. "Very well," Zoltan Chive said, noticing the nod. "So let's head off before some raiding party chances upon us on the highway. But first, Jason, Munro, search the wagons. If you find anything useful there, get it stored away, and pronto. Figgis, check if our wheel fits that little wagon. It'll be just right for us." "It fits!" yelled the one who'd been lugging the cartwheel. "Like it was made for it." "You see, Muttonhead? And you were so surprised when I made you take that wheel and carry it. Put it on. Help him, Caleb." In an impressively short time, the wagon of the dead Vera Löwenhaupt had been equipped with a new wheel, stripped of its tarpaulin and inessential elements, and pulled out of the ditch and onto the road. All their goods were heaved onto it in an instant. After some thought, Zoltán Ciri also ordered the children to be loaded onto the wagon. The instruction was carried out reluctantly. Geralt noticed that the children's mothers scowled at the dwarves and tried to keep their distance from them. With visible distaste, Dandelion watched two dwarves trying on articles of clothing removed from some corpses. The remaining dwarves rummaged around among the wagons, but didn't consider anything to be worth taking. Zoltán Ciri whistled through his fingers, signalling that the time for looting was over, and then he looked over Roach, Pegasus, and Milver's black with an expert eye. "Saddle horses," he said, wrinkling his nose in disapproval. "In other words, useless. Figgis and Caleb to the shaft. We'll be hauling in turn. March!" Geralt was certain the dwarves would quickly discard the wagon the moment it got well and truly stuck in soft, boggy ground. But he was mistaken. They were as strong as oxen, and the forest tracks leading east turned out to be grassy and not too swampy, even though it continued to rain without letting up. Milver became gloomy and grumpy, and only broke her silence to express the conviction that the horses' softened hooves would split at any moment. Zoltán Ciri licked his lips in reply, examined the hooves in question, and declared himself a master at roasting horse meat, which infuriated Milver. They kept to the same formation, the core of which was formed by the wagon hauled on a shift system. Zoltán marched in front of the wagon. Next to him, on Pegasus, rode Dandelion, bantering with the parrot. Geralt and Milver rode behind them, and at the back trudged the 6 women from Kerno. The leader was usually Percival Schuttenbach, the long-nosed gnome. No match for the dwarves in terms of height or strength, he was their equal in stamina and considerably superior in agility. During the march, he never stopped roaming around and rummaging in bushes. Then he would pull ahead and disappear, only to appear and, with nervous, monkey-like gestures, signal from a considerable distance away that everything was in order and that they could continue. Occasionally he would return and give a rapid report about the obstacles on the track. Whenever he did, he would have a handful of blackberries, nuts, or strange but clearly tasty roots for the 4 children sitting on the wagon. Their pace was frightfully slow, and they spent 3 days marching along forest tracks. They didn't happen upon any soldiers, they saw no smoke or the glow of fires. They were not alone, however. Every so often, Percival spotted groups of fugitives hiding in the forests. They passed several such groups hurriedly, because the expressions of the peasants armed with pitchforks and stakes didn't encourage them to try to make friends. There was, nonetheless, a suggestion to try to negotiate and leave the women from Kerno with one of the groups, but Zoltán was against it, and Milver backed him up. The women were in no hurry at all to leave the company either. This was all the stranger, since they treated the dwarves with such obvious, fearful aversion and reserve, hardly ever spoke, and kept out of the way during every stop. Geralt ascribed the women's behaviour to the tragedy they had experienced a short time before, although he suspected that their aversion may have been due to the dwarves' casual ways. Zoltán and his company cursed just as filthily and frequently as the parrot called Field Marshal Windbag, but had a wider repertoire. They sang dirty songs, which Dandelion enthusiastically joined in with. They spat, blew their noses on their fingers, and gave thunderous farts, which usually prompted laughs, jokes, and competition. They only went into the bushes for major bodily needs. With the minor ones, they didn't even bother moving very far away. This finally enraged Milver, who gave Zoltán a good telling off when, one morning, he pissed on the still warm ashes of the campfire, totally oblivious to his audience. Having been dressed down, Zoltán was unperturbed, and announced that shamefully concealing that kind of activity was only common among two-faced, perfidious people, who were likely to be informers and could be identified as such by doing just that. This eloquent explanation made no impression on the archer. The dwarves were treated to a rich torrent of abuse, with several very specific threats, which was effective, since they all obediently began to go into the bushes. To avoid laying themselves open to the appellation of perfidious informers, however, they went in a group. The new company, nevertheless, changed Dandelion utterly. He got on famously with the dwarves, particularly when it turned out that some of them had heard of him, and even knew his ballads and couplets. Dandelion dogged Zoltán's company. He wore a quilted jacket he had weaseled out of the dwarves, and his crumpled hat with a feather was replaced by a swashbuckling marten fur cap. He sported a broad belt with brass studs, into which he had stuck a cruel-looking knife he had been given. This knife pricked him in the side each time he tried to lean over. Fortunately, he quickly mislaid it, and wasn't given another. They wandered through the dense forests covering the hillsides of Turlough. The forests seemed deserted. There were no traces of any wild animals, for they had apparently been frightened away by the armies and fugitives. There was nothing to hunt, but they weren't immediately threatened by hunger. The dwarves were lugging along a large quantity of provisions. As soon as they were finished, however, and that occurred quickly, because there were many mouths to feed, Jason Varda and Munro Bruce vanished soon after dark, taking an empty sack with them. When they returned at dawn, they had 2 sacks, both full. In one was fodder for the horses, in the other barley, groats, flour, beef jerky, an almost entire cheese, and even a huge haggis, a delicacy in the form of a pig's stomach stuffed with offal and pressed between 2 slats, the whole resembling a pair of bellows. Geralt guessed where the haul had come from. He didn't comment right away, but bided his time until a moment when he was alone with Zoltan, and then asked him politely if he saw nothing indecent in robbing other fugitives, who were no less hungry than them after all, and fighting for survival just like them. The dwarf answered gravely that indeed he was very ashamed of it, but unfortunately such was his character. "Unbridled altruism is a huge vice of mine," he explained. "I simply have to do good. I am a sensible dwarf, however, and know that I am unable to do everyone good. Were I to attempt to be good to everyone, to the entire world, and to all the creatures living in it, it would be a drop of fresh water in the salt sea. In other words, a wasted effort. Thus I decided to do specific good, good which would not go to waste. I'm good to myself and my immediate circle." Geralt asked no further questions. At one of the camps, Geralt and Milva chatted at length with Zoltan Chive, the incorrigible and compulsive altruist. The dwarf was well informed about how the military activities were proceeding. At least he gave that impression. "The attack," he said, frequently quietening down Field Marshal Windbag, who was screeching obscenities, "came from Drishot, and began at dawn on the 7th day after Lammas. Niflgaard marched with its allies, the Verdanian army, since Verden, as you know, is now an imperial protectorate. They moved swiftly, putting all the villages beyond Drishot to the torch, and wiping out the Brugian army which was garrisoned there. The Nilfgaardian infantry marched on the fortress in Dillingen from the other side of the Yaruga. They crossed the river in a totally unexpected place. They built a pontoon bridge. Only took them half a day, can you believe it?" "It's possible to believe anything," muttered Milva. "Were you in Dillingen when it started?" "Thereabouts," the dwarf replied evasively. "When news of the attack reached us, we were already on the way to the city of Brugge. The highway was an awful shambles. It was teeming with fugitives, some of them fleeing from the south to the north, others from the north to the south. They jammed up the highway, so we got stuck, and Nilfgaard, as it turned out, were both behind us and in front of us. The forces that had left Drishot must have split up. I reckon a large cavalry troop had headed northeast, towards Brugge." "So the Nilfgaardians are already north of Turlough. It appears we're stuck between 2 forces, right in the middle. Unsafe." "Right in the middle, yes," the dwarf agreed, "but not safe. The Imperial troops are flanked by the squirrels, Verdanian volunteers and various mercenaries, who are even worse than the Nilfgaardians. It was them as burnt down Kerno, and almost seized us later. We barely managed to leg it into the woods, so we shouldn't poke our noses out of the forest, and we should remain on guard. We'll make it to the old road, then downstream by the River Chotla to the Aina, and at the Aina we're sure to bump into the Temerian army. King Foltest's men must have shaken off their surprise and begun standing up to the Nilfgaardians." "If only," Milva said, looking at the Witcher. "But the problem is, the urgent and important matters are driving us on to the south. We pondered heading south from Turlough towards the Yaruga." "I don't know what matters are driving you to those parts," Zoltan said, glowering suspiciously at them. "It must indeed be greatly urgent and important to risk your necks for them." He paused and waited, but neither of them was in a hurry to explain. The dwarf scratched his backside, hawked and spat. "Wouldn't surprise me," he said finally, "if Nilfgaard had both banks of the Yaruga right up to the mouth of the Aina in their grasp. And where exactly on the Yaruga do you need to be?" "Nowhere specific," Geralt decided to reply, "as long as we reach the river.
I want to take a boat up to the delta."
Zoltan looked at him and laughed, then stopped immediately when he realized it hadn't been a joke.
"I have to admit," he said a moment later, "you've got quite some route in mind. But get rid of those pipe dreams. The whole of South Brugger is in flames. They'll impale you before you reach the Yaruga, or drive you to Niflgaard in fetters. However, were you by some miracle to reach the river, there'd be no chance of sailing to the delta. That pontoon bridge spanning the river from Cintra to the Brugian bank, they guard it night and day. Nothing could get through that part of the river except perhaps a salmon. Your urgent and important matters will have to lose their urgency and importance. You haven't got a prayer, that's how I see it."
Milva's glance testified that she shared his opinion. Geralt didn't comment. He felt terrible. The slowly healing bone in his left forearm and his right knee, still gnawed with the invisible fangs of a dull, nagging pain, made worse by effort and the constant damp. He was also being troubled by overwhelming, disheartening, exceptionally unpleasant feelings. Alien feelings he had never experienced before and was unable to deal with. Helplessness and resignation. After 2 days, it stopped raining and the sun came out. The forests breathed forth mists and quickly dissipating fog, and birds began to vigorously make up for the silence forced on them by the constant rain. Zoltan cheered up and ordered a long break, after which he promised a quicker march and that they would reach the old road in a day at most. The women from Kerno draped all the surrounding branches with the black and grey of drying clothing, and then, dressed only in their shifts, hid shamefacedly in the bushes and prepared food. The children charged around naked, disturbing the dignified calm of the steaming forest in elaborate ways. Dandelion slept off his tiredness. Milva vanished. The dwarves took their rest seriously. Figgis Merluzzo and Munro Bruce went off hunting mushrooms. Zoltan, Jason Varda, Caleb Stratton and Percival Schuttenbach sat down near the wagon and, without taking a breather, played Barrel, their favourite card game, which they devoted every spare minute to, including the previous wet evenings. The Witcher occasionally sat down to join them and watch them play, as he did during this break. He was still unable to understand the complicated rules of this typical dwarven game, but was fascinated by the amazing, intricate workmanship of the cards and the drawings of the figures. Compared to the cards humans played with, the dwarves' cards were genuine works of art. Geralt was once again convinced that the advanced technology of the bearded folk was not limited to the fields of mining and metallurgy. The fact that in this specific card-playing field the dwarves' talents hadn't helped them to monopolize the market was because cards were still less popular among humans than dice, and human gamblers attached little importance to aesthetics. Human card players, whom the Witcher had had several opportunities to observe, always played with greasy cards, so dirty that before cards were placed on the table, they had to be laboriously peeled away from the fingers. The court cards were painted so carelessly that distinguishing the lady from the knave was only possible because the knave was mounted on a horse, which actually looked more like a crippled weasel. Mistakes of that kind were impossible with the dwarves' cards. The crowned king was really regal, the lady comely and curvaceous, and the halberd-wielding knave jauntily mustachioed. The colour cards were called in dwarven speech the Hraval, Vaina, and Ballad, but Zoltan and the company used the common speech and human names when they played. The sun shone warmly, the forest steamed, and Geralt watched. The fundamental principle of dwarven barrel was something resembling an auction at a horse fair, both in its intensity and the volume of the bidders' voices. The pair declaring the highest price would endeavour to win as many tricks as possible, which the rival pair had to impede at all costs. The game was played noisily and heatedly, and a sturdy staff lay beside each player. These staffs were seldom used to beat an opponent, but were often brandished. "Look what you've done, you plonker, you bonehead! Why did you open with spades instead of hearts? Think I was leading hearts just for the fun of it? Why, I ought to take my staff and knock some sense into you." "I had 4 spades up to the knave, so we was planning to make a good contract."
4 spades, of course you did, including your own member, which you counted when you looked down at your cards. You was your loaf Stratton, we're not a university, we're playing cards here. And remember that when the fool has the cards and doesn't blunder, he'll even beat the sage, by thunder. Deal, Varda."
"Contract in diamonds."
"A slam in diamonds." The king led diamonds but lost his crown, fled the kingdom with his trousers down, a double in spades. Barrel? Wake up, Caleb. There was a double with a barrel. What are you bidding? A big slum in diamonds. No bid. Ugh, what now? No one's barrelling. Chickened out, laddies. You're leading, Varda. Percival, if you wink at him again, I'll whack you so hard in the kisser, your eyes will be screwed up till next winter. Knave. Lady. I'm the king on the lady. The lady's shafted. I'll take her and ha-ha! I've got another heart, kept for a rainy day. Knave, a 10, and another. And a trump. If you can't play a trump, you better take a dump. And diamonds, Sultan. Grabbed you where it hurts. Do you see him? Fucking gnome, sure. I'm going to take my staff to him. Before Zoltan could use his stick, a piercing cry was heard from the forest. Geralt was the first to his feet. He swore as he ran, pain shooting through his knee. Zoltan Chive rushed after him, seizing his sword wrapped in tabby cat skins from the wagon. Percival Schuttenbach and the rest of the dwarves ran after them, armed with sticks, while Dandelion, who'd been woken by the screaming, brought up the rear. Figgis and Munro leapt out of the forest from one side. Throwing down their baskets of mushrooms, the two dwarves gathered up the scattering children and pulled them away. Milva appeared from nowhere, drawing an arrow from her quiver while running and showing the Witcher where the scream had come from. There was no need. Geralt saw and heard, and now knew what it was all about. One of the children was screaming. She was a freckled little girl with plaits, aged about 9. She stood, petrified, a few paces from a pile of rotten logs. Geralt was with her in an instant. He seized her under the arms, interrupting her terrified shrieking, and watched the movement among the logs out of the corner of his eye. He quickly withdrew and bumped into Zoltan and his dwarves. Milva, who had also seen something moving, knocked her arrow and took aim. "Don't shoot," Geralt hissed. "Get this kid out of here, fast, and you, get back, but nice and easy. Don't make any sudden movements." At first it seemed to them that the movement had come from one of the rotten logs, as though it was intending to crawl out of the sunlit woodpile and look for shade among the trees. It was only when they looked closer that they saw features which were atypical for a log. In particular, 4 pairs of thin legs with knobbly joints sticking up from the furrowed, speckled, segmented crayfish-like shell. "Easy does it," Geralt said quietly. "Don't provoke it. Don't let its apparent sluggishness deceive you. It isn't aggressive, but it moves like lightning. If it feels threatened, it may attack, and there's no antidote for its venom." The creature slowly crawled onto a log. It looked at the humans and the dwarves, slowly turning its eyes, which were set on stalks. It was barely moving. It cleaned the ends of its legs, lifting them up one by one, and carefully nibbling them with its impressive-looking sharp mandibles. "There was such an uproar," Zoltan declared emotionlessly, appearing beside the Witcher. "I thought it was something really worrying, like a cavalryman from a Verdanian reserve troop, or a military prosecutor. And what is it? Just an overgrown creepy crawly. You have to admit nature takes on some pretty curious forms." "Not any longer," Geralt replied. "The thing that's sitting there is an eye-head, a creature of chaos, a dying post-conjunction relic, if you know what I'm talking about." "Of course I do," the dwarf said, looking him in the eyes. "Although I'm not a witcher, nor an authority on chaos and creatures like that. Well, I'm very curious to see what the Witcher will do with this post-conjunction relic. Or, to be more precise, I'm wondering how the Witcher will do it. Will you use your sword, or do you prefer my scythe?" "Nice weapon," Geralt said, glancing at the sword, which Zoltan had drawn from its lacquered scabbard, wrapped in tabby catskins. "But it won't be necessary." "Interesting," Zoltan repeated. "So, are we just going to stand here looking at each other? Just wait until that relic feels threatened, or should we withdraw and ask some Niflgaardians for help? What do you suggest, monster slayer?" "Fetch the ladle and the cauldron lid from the wagon." "What?" "Don't question his authority, Zoltan," Dandelion chipped in. Percival Schuttenbach scurried off to the wagon, and soon returned with the requested objects. The Witcher winked at the company, and then began to beat the ladle against the lid with all his strength. "Stop it! Stop it!" Zoltan Chive screamed a moment later, covering his ears with his hands. "You'll break the fucking ladle! The beast's run off! He's gone, for pock's sake!" "Oh, yes," Percival said, delighted. "Did you see him? On my life, he showed a clean pair of heels. Not that he has any." The eye-head, Geralt explained calmly, handing back the slightly dented kitchen utensils to the dwarves, has remarkably delicate, sensitive hearing. It doesn't have any ears, but hears, so to speak, with its entire body. In particular, it can't bear metallic noises. It feels them as a pain. Even in the arse, Zoltan interrupted. I know, because it pained me too when you started whacking that lid. If the monster has more sensitive hearing than I do, he has my sympathy. Sure he won't be back. He won't rustle up some mates. I don't imagine many of its mates are left on this earth. That specimen is certain not to be back in these parts for a long time. There's nothing to be afraid of. I'm not going to talk about monsters, the dwarf said, looking glum. But your concerto for brass instruments must have been heard as far away as the Skellige Islands. So it's possible some music lovers might be heading this way, and we better not be around when they come. Strike camp, boys! Hey, ladies, get clad and count up the children. We're moving out, and quickly. When they stopped for the night, Geralt decided to clear up a few issues. This time, Zoltan Chive hadn't sat down to play barrel, so there was no difficulty leading him away to a secluded place for a frank, man-to-man conversation. He got straight to the point. Out with it. How do you know I'm a witcher? The dwarf winked at him and smiled slyly. I might boast about my perspicacity. I could say I noticed your eyes changing after dusk and in full sunlight. I could show that I'm a dwarf of the world, and that I've heard this and that about Geralt of Rivia. But the truth is much more banal. Don't scowl. You can keep things to yourself, but your friend the bard sings and jabbers. He never shuts his trap. That's how I know about your profession. Geralt refrained from asking another question, and rightly so. It's like this, Zoltan continued. Dandelion told me everything. He must have sensed we value sincerity, and, after all, he didn't have to sense our friendly disposition to you because we don't hide our dispositions. So, in short, I know why you're in a hurry to go south. I know what important and urgent matters are taking you to Niflgaard. I know who you're planning to seek, and not just from the poet's gossip. I lived in Cintra before the war, and I heard tales of the child Destiny and the white-haired witcher to whom the child was granted. Geralt did not respond this time either. The rest, the dwarf said, is just a question of observation. You let that crusty monstrosity go, even though you're a witcher, and it's your professional duty to exterminate monsters like that. But the beast didn't do your surprise any harm, so you spared it, and just drove it away by banging on a cauldron lid. Because you're no longer a witcher. You're a valiant knight who is hastening to rescue his kidnapped and oppressed maiden. Why don't you stop glaring at me, he added, still not hearing an answer or an explanation. You're constantly sniffing out treachery, fearful of how this secret, now it's out, may turn against you. Don't fret. We're all going to the Aina, helping each other, supporting each other. The challenge you have in front of you is the same one we face, to survive and stay alive, in order for this noble mission to continue, or live an ordinary life, but so as not to be ashamed at the hour of death. You think you've changed, that the world has changed, but look, the world's the same as it's always been, quite the same, and you're the same as you used to be, don't fret. But drop your idea about heading off alone. Zoltan continued his monologue, unperturbed by the witch's silence, and about a solo journey south through Brugger and Sodden to the Yaruga. You'll have to search for another way to Niflgaard. If you want, I can advise you. Don't bother, Geralt said, rubbing his knee, which had been hurting incessantly for several days. Don't bother, Zoltan. He found Dandelion watching the barrel-playing dwarves. He took the poet by the sleeve and led him off to the forest. Dandelion realized at once what it was all about. One glance at the witch's face was enough. Babbler, Geralt said quietly. Windbag, big mouth. I ought to shove your tongue in a vice, you blockhead, or put a bit between your teeth. The troubadour said nothing, but his expression was haughty. When the news got out that I'd started to associate with you, the witcher continued, some sensible people were surprised by our friendship. It astonished them that I let you travel with me. They advised me to abandon you in the desert, to rob you, strangle you, throw you into a pit and bury you in dung. Indeed, I regret I didn't follow their advice. Is it such a secret who you are and what you're planning to do? Dandelion suddenly said, losing his temper. Are we to keep the truth from everybody and pretend all the time? Those dwarves, we're all one company now. I don't have a company, the witcher snapped. I don't have one, and I don't want to have one. I don't need one. Do you get it? Of course he gets it, Milver said from behind him. And I get it too. You don't need anyone, Witcher. You show it often enough. I'm not fighting a private war, he said, turning around suddenly. I don't need a company of daredevils, because I'm not going to Niflgaard to save the world or to bring down an evil empire. I'm going to get Ciri. And that's why I can go alone. Forgive me if that sounds unkind, but the rest of it doesn't concern me. And now leave me. I want to be alone. When he turned around a moment later, he discovered that only Dandelion had walked away. I had that dream again, he said abruptly. Milver, I'm wasting time. I'm wasting time. She needs me. She needs help. Talk, she said softly. Get it out. No matter how frightening it is, get it out. It wasn't frightening. In my dream, she was dancing. She was dancing in some smoky barn, and she was, hell's bells, happy. There was music playing, someone was yelling. The entire barn was shaking from shouting and music, and she was dancing, clicking her heels. And on the roof of that bloody barn, in the cold night air, Death was dancing too. Milver, Maria. She needs me. Milver turned her face away. Not just her, she whispered, quietly so he wouldn't hear. At the next stop, the Witcher demonstrated his interest in Zoltan's sword, the Sahil, which he had glanced at during the adventure with the eyehead. Without hesitation, the dwarf unwrapped the weapon from its catskins and drew it from its lacquered scabbard. The sword measured a little over 3 feet, but didn't weigh much more than 2 pounds. The blade, which was decorated along much of its length with mysterious runes, had a bluish hue and was as sharp as a razor. In the right hands, it could have been used to shave with. The 12-inch hilt, wound around with criss-crossed strips of lizard skin, had a cylindrical brass cap instead of a spherical pommel, and its crossguard was very small and finely crafted. A fine piece of work, Geralt said, making a quick, hissing moulinet, followed by a thrust from the left, and then a lightning transition to a high second parry, and then laterally into prime. Indeed. A nice bit of ironmongery.
Phew!
Percival Shootenback snorted.
Bit of ironmongery? Take a better look at it, because you'll be calling it a horseradish root next.
I had a better sword once. I won't dispute that, Zoltan said, shrugging his shoulders, because it was sure to have come from our forges. You witchers know how to wield a sword, but you don't make them yourselves. Swords like that are only forged by dwarves in Mahakam and Mount Carbon.
Dwarves smelt the steel, Percival added, and forged the laminated blades. But it's us, the gnomes, who do the finishing touches and the sharpening in our workshops, using our own gnomish technology, as we once made our Gwai-heres, the best swords in the world.
The sword I wield now, Geralt said, bearing the blade, comes from the catacombs of Creagan in Brokilon. It was given to me by the Dryads. It's a first-class weapon, but it's neither dwarven nor gnomish. It's an elven blade, at least 100 or maybe 200 years old.
He doesn't know what he's talking about,
the gnome called, picking up the sword and running his fingers over it.
The details are elven, I'll give you that. The hilt, crossguard and pommel, the etching, engraving, chasing and other decorative elements, but the blade was forged and sharpened in Mahakam. And it's true that it was made several centuries ago, because it's obvious that the steel is mediocre and the workmanship primitive. Now, hold Zoltan's Sahil against it. Do you see the difference?
Yes, I do. And I have the impression mine's just as well made. The gnome snorted and waved a hand. Zoltan smiled superciliously. The blade, he explained in a patronizing voice, should cut, not make an impression, and it shouldn't be judged on first impressions either. The point is that your sword is a typical composition of steel and iron, while my Sahil's blade was forged from a refined alloy containing graphite and borax.
It's a modern technique,
Percival burst out, a little excited, since the conversation was moving inevitably towards his field of expertise.
The blade's construction and composition, numerous laminates in its soft core, edged with hard, not soft, steel.
Take it easy, the dwarf said, reining him in. You won't make a metallurgist out of him, Schuttenbach, so don't bore him with details. I'll explain it in simple terms. It's incredibly difficult to sharpen good hard magnetite steel, Witcher. Why? Because it's hard. If you don't have the technology as we dwarves once did not, and you humans still don't have, but you want a sharp sword, you forge soft steel edges which are more malleable onto a hardened core. Your Brokilonian sword is made using just such a simplified method. Modern dwarven blades are made the opposite way around, with a soft core and hard edges. The process is time-consuming and, as I said, demands advanced technology. But as a result, you get a blade which will cut a batiste scarf tossed up in the air. Is your Sile capable of a trick like that? No, the dwarf smiled. The swords sharpened to that degree are few and far between, and not many of them ever left Mahakam. But I guarantee that the shell of that knobbly old crab wouldn't have put up much resistance against it. You could have sliced him up without breaking a sweat. The discussion about swords and metallurgy continued for some time. Geralt listened with interest, shared his own experiences, added some extra information, asked about this and that, and then examined and tried out Zoltan's Sile. He had no idea that the following day he would have the opportunity to add practice to the theory he had acquired. The first indication that humans were living in the area was the neatly stacked cord of firewood standing among wood chips and tree bark by the track, spotted by Percival Schuttenbach, who was walking at the head of the column. Zoltan stopped the procession and sent the gnome ahead to scout. Percival vanished, and after half an hour hurried back, excited and out of breath, and gesticulating from a long way off. He reached them, but instead of giving his report, grabbed his long nose in his fingers and blew it powerfully, making a sound resembling a shepherd's horn. "Don't frighten away the game," Zoltan Chive barked, "and talk. What lies ahead of us?" "A settlement," the gnome panted, wiping his fingers on the tails of his many-pocketed caftan. "In a clearing. 3 cottages, a barn, a few mud and straw huts. There's a dog running around in the farmyard and the chimney smoking. Someone's preparing food there. Porridge, and made with milk." "You mean you went into the kitchen?" Dandelion laughed. "And peered into the pot? How do you know it's porridge?" The gnome looked at him with an air of superiority, and Zoltan snarled angrily. "Don't insult him, poet. You can sniff out grub a mile away. If he says it's porridge, it's porridge. Still, I don't like the sound of this." "Why's that? I like the sound of porridge. I'd be happy to try some." "Zoltan's right," Milver said, "and you keep quiet, Dandelion, because this isn't poetry. If the porridge is made with milk, that means there's a cow, and a peasant who sees fires burning will take his cow and disappear into the forest. Why didn't this one? Let's duck into the forest and give it a wide berth. There's something fishy about this." "Not so fast, not so fast," the dwarf muttered. "There'll be plenty of time to flee. Perhaps the war's over. Perhaps the Temerian army has finally moved out, what do we know, stuck in this forest. Perhaps the decisive battle's over. Perhaps Niflgaard's been repulsed. Perhaps the front's already behind us and the peasants are returning home with their cows. We ought to examine this and find out what's behind it. Figgis and Munro, you two stay here and keep your eyes peeled. We'll do a bit of reconnaissance. If it's safe, I'll make a call like a sparrowhawk." "Like a sparrowhawk?" said Munro Broyce, anxiously moving his chin. "Since when did you know anything about mimicking bird calls, Zoltan?" "That's the old point. If you hear a strange, unrecognisable sound, you'll know it's me. Percival, lead on. Geralt, will you come with us?" "We'll all go," Dandelion said, dismounting. "If it's a trap, we'll be safer in a bigger group." "I'll leave you the field marshal," Zoltan said, removing the parrot from his shoulder and passing him to Figgis Maluzzo. "This ugly bird might suddenly start effing and blinding at the top of his voice, and then our silent approach will go to fuck. Let's go." Percival quickly led them to the edge of the forest into dense elder shrubs. The ground fell away slightly beyond the shrubs, where they saw a large pile of uprooted tree stumps. Beyond them there was a broad clearing. They peered out cautiously. The gnome's account had been accurate. There really were 3 cottages, a barn, and several sod-roofed mud and straw huts in the middle of the clearing. A huge puddle of muck glistened in the farmyard. The buildings and a small untended plot were surrounded by a low, partly fallen-down fence, on the other side of which a scruffy dog was barking. Smoke was rising from the roof of one of the cottages, creeping lazily over the sunken turfs. "Indeed," Zoltan whispered, sniffing. "That smoke smells good, particularly since my nostrils are used to the stench of burnt-down houses. There are no horses or guards around, which is good, because I bore in mind that some rabble might be resting up and cooking a meal here. Might say it's safe." "I'll take a look," volunteered Milver. "No," the dwarf protested. You look too much like a squirrel. If they see you, they might get fret, and humans can be unpredictable when they're startled. Jason and Caleb will go, but keep your bow at the ready. You can cover them if needs be. Percival, leg it over to the others. You lot be prepared, in case we have to sound the retreat. Jason Varda and Caleb Stratton cautiously left the thicket and headed towards the buildings. They walked slowly, looking around intently. The dog smelled them right away, started barking furiously, then ran around the farmyard, not reacting to the dwarves clucking and whistling. The door to the cottage opened. Milva raised her bow and drew back the bowstring in a single movement, and then immediately slackened it. A short, stout girl with long plaits came rushing out. She shouted something, waving her arms. Jason Varda sped his arms and shouted something back. The girl continued to bawl something. They could hear the sound, but were unable to make out what she was saying. But the words must have reached Jason and Caleb, who made an about turn and hurried back towards the elder shrubs. Milva drew her bow again and swept around with the arrowhead, searching for a target. "What the devil's going on?" Zoltan rasped. "What's happening? What are they running away from? Milva? Shut your trap," the archer hissed, still taking aim at each cottage and hut in turn. But she couldn't find anyone to shoot. The girl with the plaits disappeared into her cottage and shut the door behind her. The dwarves were sprinting as though the Grim Reaper was on their heels. Jason yelled something, or possibly cursed. Dandelion suddenly blanched. "He's saying—" "Oh, God!" "What?" Zoltan broke off, for Jason and Caleb had made it back, red in the face. "What is it? Spit it out." "The plague," Caleb gasped. "Smallpox." "Did you touch anything?" Zoltan Chive asked, stepping back nervously and almost knocking Dandelion over. "Did you touch anything in the farmyard?" "No, the dog wouldn't let us near." "May the fucking mutt be praised," Zoltan said, raising his eyes heavenwards. "May the gods give it a long life and a heap of bones higher than Mount Carbon. That girl, the plump one, did she have blisters?" "No, she's healthy. The infected ones are in the last cottage, our in-laws. And a lot of people have already died," she said. "Blimey, Zoltan, the wind was blowing right towards us." "That's enough teeth chattering," Milva said, lowering her bow. "If you didn't touch any infected people, you've got nothing to worry about. If it's true what she says about the pox, maybe the girl just wanted to scare you away." "No," Jason replied, still breathing heavily. "There was a pit behind the hut, with bodies in it. The girl doesn't have the strength to bury the dead, so she throws them into the pit." "Well," Zoltan said, sniffing, "that's your porridge, Dandelion. But I've slightly lost my appetite for it. Let's get out of here, and fast." The dog in the farmyard began barking again. "Get down," the Witcher hissed, dropping into a crouch. A group of horsemen came riding out from a gap in the trees on the other side of the clearing. Whistling and whooping, they circled the farmstead at a gallop and then burst into the yard. The riders were armed, but weren't in identical uniforms. Quite the contrary, in fact. They were all dressed differently and haphazardly, and their weaponry and tackle gave the impression of being assembled at random, and not in an armoury, but on a battlefield. 13, Percival Schuttenbach said, making a quick tally. "Who are they?" "Neither Niflgaard nor any other regulars," came Zoltan's assessment. "Not square tile. I think they're volunteers, a random mob. Or marauders." The horsemen were yelling and cavorting around the farmyard. One of them hit the dog with the spear shaft, and it bolted. The girl with the plaits ran outside, shouting, but this time her warning had no effect or wasn't taken seriously. One of the horsemen galloped up, seized the girl by one of her plaits, pulled her away from the doorway, and dragged her through the puddle of muck. The others jumped off their horses to assist the first, dragging the girl to the end of the farmyard. They tore her shift off her and threw her down onto a pile of rotten straw. The girl fought back ferociously, but she had no chance. Only one of the marauders didn't join in the fun. He guarded the horses, which were tied to the fence. The girl gave a long, piercing scream, then a short, pained one. They had nothing after that. "Warriors," Milva said, jumping to her feet. "Fucking heroes!" "They aren't afraid of the pox," Jason Varda said, shaking his head. "Fear," Dandelion muttered, "is a human quality. There's nothing human in them any longer." "Apart from their innards," Milva rasped, carefully knocking an arrow, "which I shall now prick." 13, Zoltan Chive repeated gravely, "and they're all mounted. You'll knock off one or two, and the rest will have us surrounded. And anyway, it might be an advance party. The devil knows what kind of bigger force they belong to." Do you expect me to stand by and watch? No, Geralt said, straightening his headband and the sword on his back. I've had enough of standing by and watching. I'm fed up with my own helplessness. But first, we have to stop them from getting away. See the one holding the horses? When I get there, knock him out of the saddle, and if you can, take out another, but only when I get down there. That leaves 11, the archer said, turning to face him. I can count. You've forgotten about the smallpox, Zoltán Ciri muttered. If you go down there, you'll come back infected. Bollocks to that, Witcher. You're putting us all at risk. For fuck's sake, she's not the girl you're looking for. Shut up, Zoltán. Go back to the wagon and hide in the forest. I'm coming with you, Milva declared hoarsely. No. Cover me from here. You'll be helping more if you do that. What about me? Dandelion asked. What should I do? The same as usual. Nothing. You're insane, Zoltán snarled. Taking on the entire band? What's got into you? Want to play the hero? Rescuing fair maidens? Shut up. Go to hell. No, wait, leave your sword. There's a whole bunch of them, so it'd be better if you didn't have to swing twice. Take my sail. One blow is enough. The Witcher took the dwarf's weapon without a word or a moment's hesitation. He pointed out the marauder guarding the horses one more time, and then hopped over the tree stumps and moved quickly towards the cottages. The sun was shining. Grasshoppers scattered in front of him. The man guarding the horses saw him and pulled a spear from its place by his saddle. He had very long, unkempt hair, falling onto a torn hauberk, patched up with rusty wire. He was wearing brand-new, clearly stolen boots with shiny buckles. The guard yelled, and another marauder appeared from behind the fence. He was carrying a sword slung from a belt around his neck and was just buttoning his breeches. Geralt was quite close by now. He could hear the guffawing of the men amusing themselves with the girl on the pile of straw. He took some deep breaths, and each one intensified his bloodlust. He could have calmed himself down, but didn't want to. He wanted to have some fun himself. And who might you be? Stop! The long-haired man shouted, hefting the spear in his hand. What do you want here? I've done enough standing and watching. What? Does the name Ciri mean anything to you? The marauder was unable to finish his sentence. A grey-fletched arrow hit him in the middle of his chest and threw him from the saddle. Before he hit the ground, Geralt could hear the next arrow whistling. The second soldier caught the arrowhead in the abdomen, low, right between the hands buttoning up his fly. He howled like an animal, bent double, and lurched back against the fence, knocking over and breaking some of the pickets. Before the others had managed to come to their senses and pick up their weapons, the Witcher was among them. The dwarven blade glittered and sang. There was a savage craving for blood in the song of the feather-light, razor-sharp steel. The bodies and limbs offered almost no resistance. Blood splashed onto his face. He had no time to wipe it off. Even if the marauders were thinking about putting up a fight, the sight of falling corpses and blood gushing in streams effectively discouraged them. One of them, who had his trousers around his knees, since he hadn't even had time to pull them up, was slashed in the carotid artery and tumbled onto his back, comically swinging his still unsatisfied manhood. The second, nothing but a stripling, covered his head with both hands, which the scythe severed at the wrists. The remaining men took flight, dispersing in various directions. The Witcher pursued them, softly cursing the pain that was once again pulsing through his knee. He hoped the leg wouldn't buckle under him. He managed to pin 2 of them against the fence. They tried to defend themselves by holding up their swords. Paralyzed by terror, their defense was woeful. The Witcher's face was once again spattered with blood from arteries slashed open by the dwarven blade. But the remaining men made use of the time and managed to get away. They were already mounted. One of them fell, however, hit by an arrow, wriggling and squirming like a fish emptied from a net. The last 2 spurred their horses into a gallop, but only one of them managed to escape, because Zoltán Ciri had suddenly appeared in the farmyard. The dwarf swung his axe around his head and threw it, hitting one of the fleeing men in the centre of the back. The marauder screamed and tumbled from the saddle, legs kicking. The last one pressed himself tight to his horse's neck, cleared the pit full of dead bodies, and galloped towards the gap in the trees. "Milva!" the Witcher and the dwarf both yelled. The archer was already running towards them. Now she stopped, frozen, with legs apart. She let her knocked bow fall, and then began to lift it up, slowly, higher and higher. They didn't hear the twang of the bowstring, neither did Milva change her position or even twitch. They only saw the arrow when it dipped and hurtled downwards.
The horseman lurched sideways out of the saddle, the feathered shaft protruding from a shoulder. But he didn't fall. He straightened up and with a cry urged his horse into a faster gallop. "What a bow!" Zoltan Chive grunted in awe. "What a shot!" "What a shot, my arse," the Witcher said, wiping blood from his face. "The horseman's got away, and he'll be back with a bunch of his mates. She hit him, and it must have been 200 paces. She could have aimed at the horse." "The horse isn't guilty of anything," Milva panted with anger, walking over to them. She spat and watched the horseman disappear into the forest. "I missed the good-for-nothing because I was a mite out of breath. Ugh, you rat, running away with my arrow. I hope it brings you bad luck." The neighing of a horse could be heard from the gap in the trees, and immediately afterwards the dreadful cry of a man being killed. "Oh," Zoltan said, looking at the archer in awe. "He didn't get very far. Your arrows are damned effective. Poisoned? Or enchanted, perhaps? Because even if the good-for-nothing had caught the smallpox, the plague wouldn't have taken its toll so quickly." "It wasn't me," Milva said, looking knowingly at the Witcher. "No, the smallpox. But I think I know who it was." "I think I do, too," the dwarf said, chewing his moustache with a canny smile on his face. "I've noticed you keep looking back, and I know someone's secretly following us, on a chestnut colt. I don't know who he is, but since it doesn't bother you, it's none of my business." "Particularly since a rear guard can have its uses," Milva said, looking at Geralt meaningfully. "Are you certain that Kay is your enemy?" The Witcher didn't reply. He gave Zoltan his sword back. "Thanks. It cuts nicely." "In the right hands," the dwarf said, grinning. "I've heard tales about witches, but to fell 8 in less than 2 minutes? There's nothing to brag about. They didn't know how to defend themselves." The girl with the plaits raised herself onto her hands and knees, stood up, staggered, and then tried ineffectually to pull down her torn shift with trembling hands. The Witcher was astonished to see that she was in no way similar to Ciri, when a moment earlier he would have sworn they were twins. The girl wiped her face with an uncoordinated movement and moved unsteadily towards the cottage, straight through the puddle of muck. "Hey! Wait!" Milva called. "Hey, you! Need any help? Hey!" The girl didn't even look towards her. She stumbled over the threshold, almost falling, then grabbed the door jamb and slammed the door behind her. "Human gratitude knows no boundaries," the dwarf commented. Milva jerked around, her face hardened. "What does she have to be grateful for?" "Exactly," the Witcher added. "What for?" "For the marauders' horses," Zoltan said, not lowering his gaze. "She can slaughter them for their meat. She won't have to kill the cow. She's clearly resistant to smallpox, and now she doesn't have to fear hunger. She'll survive, and in a few days, when she gathers her thoughts, she'll understand that thanks to you she avoided a longer frolic, and these cottages being burnt to the ground. Let's get out of here before the plague blows our way. Hey, Witcher, where are you going? To get a token of gratitude?" "To get a pair of boots," Geralt said coldly, stooping down over the long-haired marauder, whose dead eyes stared heavenwards. "These look right for me." They ate horse-meat for several days. The boots with the shiny buckles were quite comfortable. The Niflgaardian called Cair was still riding in their tracks on his chestnut colt, but the Witcher had stopped looking back. He had finally fathomed the arcana of barrel and even played a hand with the dwarves. He lost. They didn't speak about the incident in the forest clearing. There was nothing to say. Mandrake, or love apple, is a class of plant from the mandragora or nightshade family, a group including herbaceous stemless plants with parsnip-like roots, in which a similarity to the human form may be observed. The leaves are arranged in a rosette. Mandrake, autumnalis or officinalis, is cultivated on a small scale in Vicovaro, Rohan, and Umlac, rarely found in the wild. Its berries, which are green and later turn yellow, are eaten with vinegar and pepper, while its leaves are consumed raw. The root of the mandrake, which is a valued ingredient in medicine and herb lore, long ago had great import in superstitions, particularly among the Nordlings. Human effigies, called alrunics or alrauns, were carved from it and kept in homes as revered talismans. They were believed to offer protection from illness, to bring good fortune during trials, and to ensure fertility and uncomplicated births. The effigies were clad in dresses, which were changed at each new moon. Mandrake roots were bought and sold, with prices reaching as much as 60 florins. Bryony roots, QV, were used as substitutes. According to superstition, mandrake was used for making spells, magical philters, and poisons. This belief returned during the period of the witch hunts. The charge of the criminal use of mandrake was made, for example, during the trial of Lucretia Vigo, QV. The legendary Philippa Alhard, QV, was also said to have used mandrake as a poison. Effenberg and Talbot, Encyclopaedia Maxima Mundi, Volume 9.